Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Redemption Thursdays with Rabbi Pinchas Winston. I'm Yehudis Shamroth. I live in Ramat Beit Shemesh for many years now, and I'm very grateful to be living here, despite the fact we're going into about our fourth weekend of a war, started by Hamas, but it's been going on for quite a while. Let's hope this is the final one. Rabbi Winston always gives us his amazing insights and deep Torah knowledge to help us learn how to cope with the situation at hand, to read the real live current events through the eyes of the Torah and through the eyes of Kabbalistic sources sometimes. Please visit his old website, 36.org, where you can get weekly parshiot and other wonderful, wonderful readings and books and webinars, seminars on all topics, Geula related and parsha related and things. But his new website is even more wonderful, Shar Nun Productions, as you can see down below. And Rabbi will tell a little bit about it if he wants to, because it's pretty new. And I'd like to, without further ado, invite Rabbi Pinchas Winston on.
Thank you. Just to clarify something, they're both active websites. 36.org is my American nonprofit organization. Sharon Productions is my Israeli one. They work together. They're like sister organizations. So the only difference is that on Shar Nun Production, that's where I upload. If I'm writing essays and I'm doing a blog, then I will usually upload it to Shar Nun Production, which I've been doing the last couple of weeks since the war began. But 36.org remains to be my main website, which is also where I sell the books and everything, and perceptions, which can be from both websites, but they're both active websites. Okay, having said that, last week we looked at, and the main issue we're dealing with here is that, context. That's context in life is everything. In business is everything. In a discussion is everything. How many times you walk into a discussion halfway through it, or into a program halfway through, not knowing the full story, and the first thing your mind does is jump to a conclusion based upon what you've heard and said, and you can be completely wrong because it's out of context. You have the context, you have the structure. The ultimate context is the big picture. The ultimate context of the ultimate context is God's master plan for creation, which began long before creation actually began, and will continue on long after the year 6000, after history as we know it comes to close, well past the world to come. It goes on and on and on to levels and realities that we don't even understand. We don't know. They have some names. Some Kabbalistic works talk about these things, but they're beyond their experience. It's just technical information. But the point is that the context of history is vast. It's huge. It's really much. If the universe impresses you, the physical universe with the Milky Way galaxy and all the billions of galaxies and all and that impresses you, that's nothing compared to the overall plan for creation, which is very, very, very vast and for all intents and purposes, infinite from our perspective. So what's going on today, just like, for example, in the 1800s or the 1700s, whatever was going on, that was everything for them, the people living at that time. And people panicked, people were happy, whatever the situation brought out of people. But when you're living in a slice of time, that tends to be what you relate to, because that's the world that's affecting you directly and emotionally and intellectually, but sometimes you can step back and you can look at a larger picture, and it's that larger picture that gives you perspective on life and appreciation of what's happening, why is it happening, to whatever degree we can't understand why it's happening, and it's one of the most valuable assets a person can have in life, is that larger picture, that context, because it's what writes the situation, what gives you the ability to be able to respond to a scenario correctly. And that's why, for example, you visit a doctor, the first thing a doctor does is take your personal history. If he doesn't know who you are, doesn't know your past, because that personal medical history provides context, because one medicine may work for one person but doesn't work for another person. People have died because a medicine that normally works for that situation instead did not, because they had another problem that wasn't picked up or wasn't known or wasn't spoken about or they couldn't tell it, and it had an adverse effect in the end. So context in all aspects of life is very crucial. And last week we discussed the overall context, not so much before creation and not so much about after 6,000, but really just the 6,000 years of history that we're really concerned with, and particularly our period of time. So just very briefly, we spoke about 6,000 years, and even though some people think that 6,000 is not absolute, but the reality is that 6,000 is crucial. It's based upon the spheres. It's based upon Kabbalah, and therefore it's absolute. To those who don't know the Kabbalah behind it, so then they might think it's not, but it is, because that's it's like genetic coding in a person's body. Pretty much defines how long the person's going to live and what's going to affect them, how it's going to affect them. So likewise, that the spheres dictate the length of a millennium, and history, what's going to happen, the potential of that millennium. So 6,000 years, the Gemara says it's divided into 3 periods of time: 2,000 years of tohu, chaos, null and void, because no one was really spiritually connecting to God at all. And then 2,000 years of history, which was Avraham Avinu's 52nd year, which would have begun in last week's Parsha, and lasted for 2,000 years until 4,000. And the last 2,000 years of history are what the Gemara calls Ikvadim Mashiach, the footsteps of Mashiach, which means that from 4,000 onward, this is before anything happened, before the temples were destroyed, this is already determined. This is what God built into creation. So it indicates how, even though that Mashiach can come early, there is a specific time in history from 4,000 onward that is designated from creation. It's built into creation. It's built into the Bria. And the reality of that is very, very, we can see, because basically here we are, 5783, well, close to the end of the 6th millennium, and Mashiach hasn't come yet, or at least he hasn't revealed himself yet. I mean, it just seems not even going out on a limb, not even a stretch to say the Mashiach is in the world today. Interesting how people only relate to Mashiach being here as when he shows up, as if he's born 1 second and reveals himself the next second. But again, as we pointed out before in the past, the Moshe Rabbeinu, who was born to be the Moshiach, the Redeemer in his generation, and technically and potentially could have been Mashiach himself. In fact, it's brought down, he will be, right? I guess someone born from Yehuda, so the body itself descends from King David, but the soul inside will be Moshe Rabbeinu's soul. So Moshe will come back to finish what he began back then, because the Jewish people were not ready yet for that redemption. But he was walking the face of the earth for 79 years, probably knew he was special. The very fact, listen, his mother took care of him. Miriam understood that he was born for the special purpose. But until things began to look like it was going to be a redemption, so it looked like exile. And even Moshe rejected being asked by God to be the Redeemer for a whole week, until God finally put his foot down, so to speak, and say, that's it. We've discussed this now for 7 days. I'm not quite sure how they did that for 7 days, and kept the discussion alive. And did they take breaks? And now we talk about the things in the meantime, but the weather's like that. But somehow 7 days later, God said, no, you're going. This is what I plan to do. So then he shows up. And even after he showed up and he gave people the hope that redemption was imminent, they believed him at first. But then when Paro did not change his tune, on the contrary, he changed it to make it worse. He began to impose additional slavery on the Jewish people, and that just made it seem like just the opposite. The Kli Yakar, happened to see this week the Kli Yakar in Parshas V'Eschanan, commenting on the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and why this is unique to the Jewish people, because he explains because one of the reasons why people turned their backs on God or believed in more than one God, at least back in the times of idol worship, was because they saw opposite things happen. They saw great things happen to people, and they saw terrible things happen to people. They couldn't understand how one God could be responsible for both. So they came to the conclusion that one God was responsible for the good, and another God, at least, was responsible for the bad. And that's the way. So idol worship, that was the mentality. And it sounds funny and strange, but the truth is, we do similar things in our own way. When someone says, they cannot accept a God who could bring a Holocaust, inside that statement is an understanding of what God should be. What do you mean? Why not? So God brought a Holocaust. No, because I understand that God is good. I understand that God can do whatever he wants, and that he can do whatever he wants, and he wants to do good. Only good should result. So how can a Holocaust happen if God exists and God is good? So therefore, it must be he doesn't. So the opposites. The answer is there to some degree, not completely. We can't answer all these questions, and certainly not fully, but some aspects of the answers do exist, and there's a way to be machriya. There's a way to work it out that you can understand how God can be completely good and yet allow or be responsible, so to speak, for the completely bad. And that's a discussion for another time, not right now. But the point just being that it's very hard to believe that redemption is about to happen when so much bad is going on until you read, for example, the Gra. In Achros Kereshis, which is based upon the teachings of the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, right, and the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim, and they both talk about these things, learning from Egypt, learning from what happened in Moshe's time and how the whole thing played out, and also in terms of the Babylonian exile, and giving us details, giving us dots to connect, and building the bigger picture, the context, understand how that it's like, as they say, it's always darkest before the dawn. It's always darkest before, the night is the darkest before it starts to get light once again, because you have to go to the darkest and then it starts getting lighter once again. That's the mashal. That's the parable for history, for Jewish history. So that's, how the whole thing, is supposed to work. And that's why we could be living here in the world and in Eretz Yisrael, going about our business. Not too many people think about Mashiach when times are going well. As the joke goes, right? Mashiach is just going to come and make a mess. He's going to ruin everything. He's going to make our lives more inconvenient in the end. Because I have exactly the way I want it just right now. I got a good job. I've got a nice shul down the street. I have my kids in cheder, yeshiva, and they're married off. And he's like, and Mashiach is going to come and have to uproot all that and move to Eretz Yisrael. Hey, let him come in another generation. Okay, that has to be worked out. But when things are going well and the galus does not threaten us, so then people don't think about Mashiach and they just assume he's not here. Or he would just show up. The newspapers would cover it. Somehow he'd have a social media account and say, hi, I'm here, Mashiach, I've arrived. But there are people that do exactly that, but they weren't the real Mashiach. And instead, when things start to go bad, so then all of a sudden people start talking messianic, and then you can see how God does what he does and why he does it. Because the truth is, all the things we're doing right now, for those who are doing it, people running to put on tzitzis, people started to put on tefillin, people started to be mafresh challah, people started to do all kinds of mitzvahs, keep Shabbos maybe, the ben adam chavera, acting between one another more friendly and try to get rid of some of the political difference. All these things that we're doing right now because of the war are things we should have been doing during peaceful times and are crucial for redemption. But we're not working on those things. So therefore, you see how when Hashem does something negative, how it brings out so much positive. And you say, well, I wish it, but that's us. Because we had the opportunity. We have the sources. All we had to do was yearn for redemption. That's the main thing. But we had to realize that as nice as exile had become, as comfortable as we were, the Shekhinah is still in pain. The entire time that the divine presence is in exile, it's in pain. We might not feel the pain, but it's in pain. And being Jewish is about more than simply keeping Shabbos and keeping the mitzvahs and taking meiser, taking tithes and things like that. It's more than that. It's a means to an end. But we're people missing our temple. And our temple was the central point of the Jewish people because that was the house of God that you could go up to and have an experience of the divine like nowhere else in the country or for the world for that matter, for sure. And we're missing that connection to God. God's more theoretical today than actual for most people. And that's why the moment the situation gets bad, their emunah cracks and their bitachon cracks because up until now it's been mostly theoretical. Most of us today, if you're 60s, younger, we didn't see the effects of World War II. We didn't see the effects of the Holocaust even. When I was young, by the time I was old enough to recognize anything, all the damage had been repaired. All the buildings, I grew up in Canada anyhow, there's nothing to look at in Canada, but even in Europe, everything was rebuilt. And you couldn't talk about the Holocaust for the first couple of decades because it was too painful. So it was like literally we not part of our experience until later on, but again, just theoretical. Everything going on today right now is outside the box for all of us. What happened also, right, in the beginning on Simchas Torah, the atrocities, the cruelty, all that's taken place since then it's not just a regular war. Something else is going on, and people sense it. People talk about it. I mean, there's already been incidences in Russia and New York and different places in the world where Jews have had to be worried about their safety. That was coming. That was predicted. It was predictable because that's what always happens at the end of an exile. But we've never experienced the end of an exile. So we don't know what it's like. So we have history books. And that's what the Torah tells you, to learn history, to know what's happened in the past, not just in the Chumash, not just in Tanakh, but in your own personal history, your own personal past, within hundreds of years and see what's going on, especially if you believe in God and you believe in Torah, you believe in Tanakh. And that context, that's what talks to us. That's what tells us. We don't have prophecy today like they once did. It was an incredible experience that we can't even think about. It's not just like me talking to you, you talking to me, and we survive just nicely. And it doesn't affect us. You hear something, okay, that's conversation between people. It's normal. A prophet had to be asleep, except for Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the only one. But every other prophet, Isaiah, Jeremiah, right? Ezekiel, or as we call him in Hebrew, Yeshaya, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, all these great prophets had to be asleep when prophecy came to them because their bodies went into convulsions because God was talking to them. It's a whole different experience. It's a whole different reality. We don't have that. Nothing close. The best thing we have is amazing Yeshkacha Pratis, amazing divine providence. 3 things I learned today that are unconnected happen to happen at the same time. What a coincidence. No, we don't really believe in coincidences like that. We don't believe in random coincidences. Coincidence just means things happen at the same time, but we believe because God did that, and God's talking to me because the odds of that happening when that happened and that happened are astronomical. So we call it Hashgacha Pratis. That's the closest we get. And maybe some great people today have something called Ruach HaKodesh, which means it's like divine inspiration. It's like God directs them, gives them extra insight, an extra chush, an extra sense, more than the rest of us. And they can make decisions that go beyond the average human being's capability. But again, it's a far stretch from prophecy. So what do we have? Context. We have sources. We have ideas. We have a big picture that God left to us. He gave to us that the prophets prophesied in their time for the end of days. And it wasn't the end of days in their time. And I don't think they thought the end of days was coming in the next century either. It can always come. Mashiach can always come early. But he didn't. Not that we know of. And certainly didn't finish the job. Right? And they're talking about when? Now. So moving on, continuing on with another important dot to connect, another piece of the big picture we need to have to understand why what's going on today is so special. And that is what the Gemara talks about. Well, the truth is, it's actually, the Vilna Gaon talks about, Leshon talks about, Kabbalah talks about, the Zohar talks about, it's the idea that every millennium of history, from creation until 1,000, 1,000 to 2,000, 2,000 to 3,000. Here we are, 5,000 to 6,000. Each of the millennia corresponds to one of the 6 days of creation, respectively. In other words, the first day is the basis of the 1,000 years. The second day is the basis of the second millennium. The Vilna Gaon points this out in his parish on Sifra Nusa. He says everything that's going to happen in any particular millennium is based upon what happened in that particular day of creation. So there's a correlation between the two. Most people don't know that. Most people don't think about that. They just assume that the 6 days were the 6 days, and coincidentally, there's also 6 millennia, if they even know that. But it's like a whole different world. It wasn't meant to be anyhow, right? Adam was not supposed to eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but he did. If he hadn't, then there'd be no 6 millennia like we have today. We'd all be back in the Garden of Eden. But he didn't. Made a mistake. So somehow the 6 millennia just is like overtime. It's just we got kicked out of the classroom, put in the corner, whatever you want to say, and that's where we are until the teacher calls us back in again. But that's not true. That's not the way we look at it. The 6 millennia of history were always meant to happen, and they're built upon the 6 days of creation, meaning, and the Vilna Gaon says it specifically. In fact, he says that because of this correlation, you could figure out the actual final date of arrival of Mashiach, which he apparently could, by knowing this information. Okay, I don't know. I mean, I've heard of some people who have made the calculation, but he happened to add also that if you do make the calculation and you come up with a number, you can't tell anybody else. I'm imposing an oath on anybody who figures it out not to tell somebody else. So I was once told that there were 2 Kabbalists in the same generation, the same city actually, who figured it out, but they couldn't compare notes because they held to the oath. They couldn't share it. But there's this correlation. Now, the reason why that's so important, really important, I mean, crucially important, is because one of the single most important events of all of history, which we thought was way in the past, nothing to do with us today, except for the fact that it led to our exile. But other than that, it's over. It was like a story, happened, boom, gone. Just like I don't know what my great ancestors did, 1,000 years ago, wherever I came from. History, it's gone. I am what I am today, and obviously built upon that way back then. But what difference does it make to me today, especially if I can't know it? But that's not the way it works. That's what the Vilna Gaon is trying to tell us. The Gra is telling us it doesn't work that way. He's telling us that whatever happened on the 6th day of creation is going to have some type of correlation, correspondence. Something's going to happen in the 6th millennium that's going to be similar, if not actually physically, but certainly conceptually. Now, of course, the event that we have to be concerned about is not the creation of man. That took place on the 6th day too, but that's a good thing, supposedly. The thing that we have to worry about is the eating of the tree of good and evil, eating of the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, because that's where everything went wrong. Whether it was meant to be, whether God planned, it doesn't make a difference. But that's the thing that caused us to leave paradise and go out into the world and suffer so far through 5,784 years of history. And we're not done yet because of that. And we thought that was in the past. And all of a sudden we're being told, no, that's going to come around again. That's going to happen sometime in the future. I mean, some kind of trees going to sprout somewhere in the world? Well, not necessarily an actual tree like we understand trees to be, but something similar, a concept, an idea. In fact, usually that redemption is just the flip side of exile. In other words, and vice versa. That whatever the koyach is necessary for redemption, that's what's usually in exile until the redemption actually happens. Meaning that there's a duality, as I mentioned before in the past, that the gematria of Mashiach and Nachash are the same. They both equal the same. Nachash means snake, and Mashiach versus Mashiach. Why should they be the same? Just a coincidence? No, because they're really the two sides of the same coin. The Mashiach represents a certain concept, at least the redemption, and the Nachash represents the same concept in the opposite form. In the side, because when Hashem made the world, as we say in Koheles, He made everything zeh l'uma zeh. there's a corresponding reality on the side of good and the side of bad, on the side of purity and the side of impurity. They're opposites, but they're like mirror images, but completely opposites in the end. So the tree of knowledge of good and evil, therefore, has some type of corresponding reality in the 6th millennium. And now, if you know that some really negative situation is coming around again, you want to be prepared for it. More than that, you also recognize, based upon the rule we just expressed, that if it's coming around again, it's not to do the same mistake. It's coming around to give us an opportunity to fix it, finally. And more than likely, that if that's what caused us to go into exile, the eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, at whatever moment it was where we crossed that line between theoretical sin and actual sin, that moment of no return, when you've done the damage and it can't be fixed, right? That moment had the potential for redemption as well. And therefore, when it comes on the second time, more than likely, that's the moment that the redemption occurs, if you just figure it out. Because you look in the Chumash, basically, it just talks about what God did each day. Even in the 6th day, it just says what God did in the 6th day. It doesn't tell you what happened hour by hour. But as I mentioned last week, that the Gemara itself in Sanhedrin, Allah Ches Amid Beis, actually tells us what God was doing hour by hour, hour by hour, hour by hour. So we can make the correlation, and without going through all the math, I have this in several of my books, the calculation, how you get to it. It's not so hard, but you actually just divide 1,000 by 83.3 by 12, because since God only created during the daytime hours, and the millennium corresponds to creation, so it can only correspond to the 12 hours of the day, not 24 hours a day, and that leaves 83.33 years per every hour, et cetera, and then you just make the calculation. It turns out that it's a 1990, 5750 in the Jewish year, which works out beautifully. You know why? Because we have different ways of looking at the same thing, and each one provides a different insight. So, for example, if each of the days of creation correspond to millennium, so each of the millennium corresponds to a day, and works the same way. So, a halachic day is divided into 4 parts, right? You have the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, and the fourth quarter. Meaning, and there's halachic differences. There's halachic realities. For example, when you can eat on Erev Shabbos in the afternoon a bread meal because you're supposed to be hungry for Shabbos. There's a halachic reality. You can only say Shema up until a certain point in the day, and then the mitzvah is over because of the halachic reality. It's based upon these hours. And we talk about hours. We're not talking about clock hours. We're talking about what we call shasmaniyos, which are halachic hours, because since the day is always changing, the amount of daylight hours from one day to the next is never exactly the same. So therefore, you divide from the time the sun rises to the time the sun sets, which we call shkia, by 12, that's consistent, then the actual hour is going to be different. So in the wintertime, a halachic hour will be less than 60 minutes. In the summertime, a halachic hour will be longer than 60 minutes, but still called a halachic hour no matter what. And that defines the halacha. So at Erev Shabbos, in the summertime, you have more time to eat a bread meal because there are more clock hours per halachic hours. And in the wintertime, this is the opposite, that there are less clock hours to a halachic hour, but that defines the day. And basically, it's the path of the sun. So, the sun rises, and the first quarter of the day, it's a certain height in the sky. It's on an angle, right? It's 45-degree angle. Then halfway, it's chatzot. It's middle of the day, up on top like that. And then it goes down another quarter, which is like the 9th hour of the day. And then finally sunset at the 12th hour of the day. And during the rest of the week, it's not such a crucial thing, except in terms of mincha. But Erev Shabbos, of course, it makes a difference, because Erev Shabbos is Friday afternoon. And whereas the rest of the 6 days of the week, you don't have to do much preparing for the night unless you're having an event come up or something like that. But the average person works a certain time, then goes home. Maybe stops at the mincha marva in the way, then goes home. Not a whole lot of preparing in the afternoon. But Erev Shabbos, we already start preparing for chatzot. You're not supposed to get involved in activities that are not really Shabbos related after chatzot, unless you really have to. Your job depends upon it. But there's already halachic realities. The halacha is, for example, that normally a man cannot go shopping before he davens shachris, before he davens in the morning. But if on Friday morning he hasn't davened yet and the makolot's open, here in Israel, that's by 6:30 in the morning, the makolot's already open. The makolot's open, so, and he's worried that if he waits until after davening, the thing that he wants, l'chav Shabbos kodesh, is not going to be there. There's a heter where he can now go shopping and buy that thing now and then go daven because of Shabbos. The Shabbos is that chashuv. Shabbos is that important. So the Zohar says that's why 5500 in the 6th millennium is so important, because that's chatzot on the Erev Shabbos of history. 5500, 1740. So the Talmidim of the Gra wrote that the moment he was 20 years old, the Vilna Gaon, when this happened, but the moment that 5500 came around, he took it seriously. He said, based upon the Zohar, this is the final generation. Now, that was already hundreds of years ago. So if he said that back then, imagine what it is today. And because of that, he began to turn his focus. And there's one paragraph where they talk about how he would pace back and forth anxiously. He was agitated. This doesn't happen all the time with the Vilna Gaon. He was agitated because he felt something had to be done to expedite the redemption. The time had come to start moving in the direction of redemption, because it was now 5500. It was the chatzot of Erev Shabbos. So he began to train his Talmidim, teach them in preparation to make Aliyah to Eretz Israel and start rebuilding the Yishuv, which they did. By the early 1800s, they were already in Israel. He passed away in 1790. They were already in Israel and already beginning to build the Yishuv. Me'ashirim and Rehovot, also Rechavi. I think that those areas there, it was dangerous. It was difficult. There was disease, all kinds of. But they did it. They started, and here we are today. The Hemshech, the continuation of what they started back in the 1800s, remarkable. There's ways of Aliyah, exactly beginning with the Gra's Talmidim at that time, because of what he took seriously in terms of the timing of it. Now, it's not the 10th hour yet. It's still quite early. It's in the 6th millennium, but it's not yet the 10th hour. So, there's still what to be done. There's prophecies still yet to be fulfilled. For example, going to the 4 corners of the world and being redeemed from the 4 corners of the world. I mean, is there any other nation in the world that promised that to their people? Even if a person does not believe the Torah came from Mount Sinai, came from God at Mount Sinai, one thing is for sure, the Torah is at least 1,000 to 2,000 years old. The Romans, back at that time, the Christians, they'll verify that for you. The Muslims too, because they built their religion on the Torah itself. So you're going back at least a couple thousand years with the Torah anyhow. And there's a prophecy in there about being gathered in from the 4 corners of the world. I mean, at that time, it was before Christopher Columbus, so they thought the world was square. So 4 corners, it doesn't mean literally. It just means from the far reaches of the world. Whatever, God knew the world wasn't flat. He made it. So, to promise that is one thing. That's already an amazing thing. The Muslims don't promise that type of a thing. The Christians don't promise that kind of a thing. Very, very, very general terms. You know why? Because no one's going to believe you. How can you if you know it came from God and then you read that, then you can't dispute it. The Jewish people didn't question it. The first people who had the Torah didn't question it because they knew it came from God. So if God said it, must be true. But the people who began the New Testament and began the Quran, you can't make those kinds of promises, or like Shemitah and things like that, because prove it. I didn't know who said. I heard God. Well, we didn't, but they did. So therefore they believed it. Phenomenal promise. Even more phenomenal is how, so late in history, we got to see it come true. I mean, that's absolutely remarkable. And that's the odds of that happening coincidentally are just so astronomical that you can't. It's got to be hashgacha pratis. It's got to be divine providence. It happened subtly. Happened over 200 years. Happened, in groups and waves and all that, right? Large amounts of people. But even the fact that there were waves of it is also quite fascinating, interesting, and quite divine providence. Because no one else has had that either. Not returning to their land, to a new land, maybe, but not returning back to their land. We're the only ones who've ever done that in the modern era and rebuilt. And the miracles keep going. The Gemara itself says that one of the biggest simanim, the most important signs that Mashiach is imminent, is when the Jewish people come back to their land and make it bloom, make it grow. It's like, take a look around. Absolutely fantastic, absolutely phenomenal. But more importantly is this 10th hour business. As of 1990, we entered a period of time. Now it's supposed to last 83.33 years. So that's a lot of time. We're already 30 years into it, 33 years into it. So there's still 50 some odd years left. A person could argue that would prove, that would show how it must be, or it can't be for sure, that Mashiach is here, because 50 years is a long time. Okay, maybe he's bored, maybe he's young, but what's going today doesn't necessarily have to be the end of everything, the beginning of the Messianic era, or the middle of the Messianic era, because there's 50 years left. Okay, but more than likely the chet, the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, didn't take place at the last second of the 10th hour, but we don't know. We do know, because the Gemara says the 10th hour. The Gemara says 10th hour. And here we are in the 10th hour. Yeah, but the 10th hour is 83. Okay, fine. So hang in the air until the Zohar comes along and says no. Because there's another limitation in history. One that you also might not have been aware of, but it's very, very important. And that is this thing called Techis Mesim, the resurrection of the dead. The resurrection of the dead is when God rebuilds mankind anew. Gilgulim, reincarnation, means the soul, migrates from one lifetime to another lifetime and is born into a body that was formed inside the mother, and then got the soul. But it's a soul that's been here before. We're all today reincarnations. No one's here for the first time, and not supposed to, at least. So resurrection is different. Resurrection is after everybody dissolves into the ground, as dead bodies do, right? And the amount of time it will take will be the same for everybody. But God rebuilds the person. That's why Motzi Shabbos, we are supposed to have a love malka, because it feeds the loose bone, which is the bone of the back of the head here, which apparently God rebuilds a whole person from, right? That's why even if people can't be buried their whole bodies at one time, or God forbid that what happened in the Holocaust, people were burned to death and their bodies weren't recoverable, God will rebuild everybody. However it has to happen, however it has to, he's going to do it. And I think some say the loose bone's indestructible, but it's from scratch. Because we have to go back to what we were like before the sin. Before the sin, we didn't have this skin that we have right now. It's physical. I can't, put my hand to the table. But in the Garden of Eden, before the sin, Adam looked more like an angel than a human being. His body was more like our soul is today. There was no Yetzer Hara inside of him. That was a snake in the beginning. And even he wasn't allowed in the Garden of Eden at first. So we have to go back to that in preparation for 6,000 and the world to come. That's what has to happen. So Techis Mesim is for that. Resurrection is for that. Now, I always learned at least, that comes later on in 7,000 the world to come. The Zohar says no. Why should it? If the whole point of it is preparation for life in the world to come, it has to come before the world to come, which begins at 6,000. So therefore, it has to take place in this period of history before 6,000. Now you have to understand something. When it begins, it's after the Messianic era. You don't need Mashiach during Techis Mesim. Techis Mesim, everybody is like an angel. That's what the Gemara says. You'll see people like angels. And not just that, but because of that, there won't be any Yetzer Hara. There'll be no evil. All the impurities will be gone from the world. You don't need Mashiach. It's like Mashiach walking to a club of Mashiachs. Redundant, to say the least. So Techis Mesim has to begin after Mashiach has already come. If only we could know how long Techis Mesim is supposed to last. So Zohar says, "Well, we can tell you that. That we know. We may not know the exact time, at least not tell you about it, but we will tell you how long Tichas and Mason is supposed to last, and it's based upon sources of addition and all that. Yehuda says 210 years, doesn't say when, but just, take 210 years for the first resurrection of righteous people, mostly those who have already died, until the last one who shuts the lights off before the next period of history. That long. Everybody will spend the same amount of time in the ground to dissolve, to become rebuilt. But when you die and when you come back, it's staggered over the course of 210 years. Rabbi Yitzchak says, well, I add 4 more years to that, 214 years. Different tradition, whatever. They both, at least 210 years. They both agree to that. No one says less than that. At least 210. At most 214. Now, 1,000 years ago, it didn't make a difference. But today, it's 5784, right? If one more detail on top of all that, and that will follow 4 years of Kibbutz Galius. And that for sure shows how it's taking place on this side of 6,000, because Kibbutz Galius is a matter of this world now. Kibbutz Galius, the gathering of the exiles in the world to come. There's no exiles at that time. There's no exiles before that. So therefore, it's 40 years of Kibbutz Galius, and then it's 210 years to 214 years. So that means that the entire period of time, the beginning of Kibbutz Galius until the end of Teches and Mesim, according to Yehuda, is 250 years. According to Rabbi Yitzchak, is 254 years. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves at the 1986, at the 254 mark. We just literally ran out of time. Before that, for the longest time, we had a lot of time. For thousands of years. So that could happen anytime in the course of thousands of years. But all of a sudden, as of 1986, hit the 254 mark. And coincidentally, Russia begins to implode, and over the next 3 years, Jews escape it out against everybody's expectations. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, 250 years. And that we hit as of 1990, which corresponds to the last quarter of the day 6 of the 6th millennium Erev Shabbos history. I was like, you just put it on a piece of paper, which is what I did, right? And it's in a couple of books, but you just put the whole thing. That's what happened to me. I mean, I wasn't looking for at all. Not at all. I was just looking to do Divrei Torah on the Parsha. There's more than enough exciting things to say on the Parsha from Chazal and the Gemara to do nothing with redemption. But you just keep stumbling over it. It's all through the Gemara. You start reading Sforim. Especially you start to learn a little bit of Kabbalah, right? You start to learn things and see things and say, well, that's interesting. That's fascinating. In fact, this whole thing began really with a history project, just to know Jewish history. And I was shocked and surprised to find out how much information there was to know that you could have. And I just get applauded. Information kind of like jumps out at you that says we're in a very, very late period of Jewish history that will not go on for much longer the way it is. Things have to start to change. And we've been talking about this for the longest time. And here all of a sudden it's happened out of nowhere once again, surprising us once again, which is always a sign that something overt, divine providence-wise is going on. That's that, plus other things. I mean, I've never seen so much chatter, in the social media, like videos on YouTube to do with prophecies about the end of days. Christians talking nonstop about this conflict and what it means historically in terms of the Messiah and all that. Okay, they have a different take on how things will play out, but nonetheless, the whole conflict and why it's existing, I've never seen so much attention paid to it as today. And from our side, there are beautiful videos of units about to go to war into Gaza, screaming Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and people putting on tzitzis and putting on tefillin and keeping Shabbat, all these different things. Like, it's different. It's different. You feel different. In all the other wars that I've been here, I've been for several over this country. Most of the time, you just feel, it's another word. And hopefully, no one will die and we'll be okay. But life just sort of went up, but not this time. It's not just the missiles being thrown at the entire country from all over the place, but there's something, a sense, a feeling that something biblical is taking place. Very big. And that's why you have to pay attention. And that's why you have to think about what's going on. At the same time, it's so shockingly, and surprising, and maybe we'll speak about this a bit more about Hashem, but the reaction of the world is unbelievable. And the fact that people are questioning the morality of what Israel's doing after what Hamas has done and continue to do, and as they say, don't bother me with the facts. All these countries are laughing at Westerners because they rejected these people, because they knew what they were like and the problems they can cause. And we took them in, so now we have the problems. But not them, their own brothers who have plenty of money and plenty of space. Plus the midrashim that predict these type of things happening at the end of days. All said and done, when it's all told, we don't know exactly how fast or where things are going tomorrow, but there's this sense, and you have to be aware. And I'll tell you, especially if you live in the diaspora, we've been there, we've done that, we know what it's like. And someone said to me this week that their friends said to them, what happened in Russia this week was almost basically a pogrom, and it was going on in the world, different places where people Jews are afraid for their lives, their safety. Right? We don't have to worry about that in America because America has our back. The government has our back. People think that Nazi Germany was always Nazi Germany. It wasn't. In the beginning, it was a very peaceful place for Jews to be. That's why Jews didn't leave. That's why 100,000, even after Hitler rose to power, who had the chance to leave, didn't leave because they thought the government would have their back. But the main point behind all of that is yes or no, whether they can or can't, and get there in time. And listen, 4 planes were hijacked on American soil, and 2 brought down the Twin Towers and killed thousands of people on American soil. And these were Americans. If America has Americans back, but it did make a difference in the end, because what God wants, God does. We saw that 3 weeks ago. But God wants, God does. And it's not a question of trying to outsmart him or relying upon things that you shouldn't rely upon. It's about being in the right place at the right time when God wants you to be there. That's the most important lesson a Jew can learn from history. So God willing, we should all get that message, and God should have mercy on the entire nation, wherever we are, whatever we're doing. We should have a miracle and see Mashiach come without any further suffering, that the war should come to a quick end without any more loss of lives. And Mashiach should come as Hashem and lead us into the next era peacefully, to finally the benefits of thousands of years of history and exile from the Garden of Eden.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rabbi. I'm going to have a question for you for next week, but it's going to be a long answer, so we'll hold that. But on that note, we'll say Shabbat Shalom to everybody, and please pray for the safety of all of our soldiers and anybody who's helping us, all the safety personnel and all the medical personnel, and the hostages, that they should be released soon, and then we should go into Shabbat peacefully and come out with good news, as Rabbi says, and work our way towards the Messianic era. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Good night, everyone.